1961. A few miles from the Cape Canaveral Lighthouse, the Project Mercury astronauts were making bets on who would be the first man in space. Would it be Glenn, Grissom, Shepard? At the Cape, everything was ready. Half a world away, on the vast windswept steppes of Kazakhstan, there is a place in central Russia called the Baikonur Cosmodrome. In April of 1961, as America's Freedom 7 space capsule was being made ready, a man named Yuri Gagarin climbed into his Vostok spacecraft. At 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, he was hurled into space. 1 hour and 48 minutes later, he returned, having become the first man to orbit the Earth in space. I looked and looked and looked, but I didn't see God, Yuri would say. The Soviet Union was the first to break free of the invisible chains that bind us to the Earth. And here lies a mystery. We know of Mercury and Apollo, Shepard and Glenn, the Cape and Sally Ride, and the shuttle. But what do we know of those remarkable scientist dreamers who lived and worked on the cold, broad plains of Russia? Now that the Iron Curtain no longer veils what the Soviets have done, their achievements read like an anthology of heroic tales. First Earth satellite, first soft landing on the moon, first lunar satellite, first spacecraft to land on Mars, first spacecraft to land on Venus, first man to orbit the Earth, first man to walk in space, first woman in space. The list goes on and on. Now, in this age of understanding and respect, the story of Soviet space is accessible to our examination. It is a story of precise science and machines of bewildering complexity. It's also a story of flesh and blood, fear and courage, of bold genius and profound risk. It is the epic tale of a people seeking to establish their place on Earth by leading mankind's move toward the stars. In terms of science, politics, and the human spirit, the exploration of space has always been a race. But the story doesn't begin with the Mercury astronauts and Yuri Gagarin. It begins long before the Cape and Baikonur. It's a dream the people of Earth have shared since they first looked up into the night sky. Writers of antiquity and more recent dreamers like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne carried us away on the wings of their muse. But then, in the year 1903, two things happened on opposite ends of the Earth that would begin to make our dream of travel to worlds beyond our own real. The place is called Kill Devil Hill. A pair of bicycle mechanics, the brothers Wright, turned a box kite on its side, strapped on a 12-horsepower gasoline engine, and on that cold Carolina day, they did, at last, what a hawk can do. In that same year, in a small provincial town in Russia, a high school teacher named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky was dreaming of a voyage to the moon. It was more than a dream. His theory of rocket design would make it possible for mankind to break free of the atmosphere of Earth and reach for the stars. Two events that would change the world forever. One in Russia, one in America. In Russia, it was the time of Tsar Nicholas II, a time when Lenin was organizing his Bolsheviks, when the great majority of Russian people were suffering the cruel regime of the Tsar, and dramatic political change loomed on the horizon. In America, it was more a time of ragtime than Tchaikovsky, a time of Teddy Roosevelt and Manifest Destiny and J.P. Morgan and Horatio Alger. It was a time when Henry Ford was beginning what would become a capitalist revolution. two countries, Russia, America, passing each other in opposite directions. In terms of lifestyle, values, traditions, no two societies could have been more different one from the other. They would be great allies, become great enemies. Yet for all their differences, there is this one wondrous thing they have always shared. They have shared the dream of journeys through space to distant worlds beyond our own.
The father of Soviet space exploration, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, said he was inspired by Jules Verne, that the famous writer directed his thoughts along certain lines.
Science has always been a child of the imagination. We imagine our world and then we create what our imagination has envisioned.
In the early years of the 20th century, scientists and dreamers in both Russia and America started punching holes in the sky with their primitive rockets.
Those were wonderful, adventurous years. Throughout Russia, rocket societies were organized, societies for the study of interplanetary travel.
In America, we had our rocket societies too. And we had Robert Goddard, a rocket scientist they called the Moon Man, because he insisted it was theoretically possible to fire a rocket to the moon.
Well, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky made such a moon rocket possible with his theory of reactive motion. He also came up with the idea of using liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen for fuel.
But it was the American, Goddard, who first developed the liquid fuel rocket. Without the liquid fuel rocket, we probably would never have reached the moon.
But it had been predicted by our Tsiolkovsky many years earlier.
And so the race for space began. In Russia, the time of the Tsar had passed, and the people were creating a new social order. In America, free enterprise was creating a prosperity unlike any the world had ever known. World War II made it evident that German rocket scientists had made good use of Tsiolkovsky's and Goddard's visions. At the end of the war, much of the German rocket technology, including the V-2 rocket, was captured by the Americans and Russians. The fruits of victory also included many gifted rocket scientists. With the hardware and genius of the German rocketeers, the competition between the Soviet Union and America intensified. Relations between the two old allies became severely strained by confrontations in Berlin and Korea. The old pure motives of dreamer and scientist became clouded by the political realities of the Cold War.
We could only prepare for war. Lenin had warned the Russian people there would be wars as long as there were capitalists.
Similar fears emerged in America about communism.
Both countries rushed to create rockets powerful enough not only to reach space, but to carry warheads that could destroy the other. And then, something wonderful and terrible happened. In August of 1957, the Soviets successfully tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. And then, on October 4th of that same year, Soviet scientists used that rocket to launch Sputnik, the first man-made satellite to orbit the Earth. It was an event that would change the world forever. For 3 months, Americans felt naked and vulnerable as this Soviet presence lurked in the sky above our heads. Fear of the unknown stalked the American consciousness. Could the Soviet Union be planning to bombard us with propaganda, or even monstrous weapons from space? Throughout the land, there was a fear of communism. The sale of bomb shelters soared, and Americans prepared to go underground to survive the coming war. The year was 1957. It was the year a little-known aviator, John Glenn, set a speed record for flying an aircraft across country from California to New York. But our minds were on something else passing above America that year. When we looked up into the night sky, our hearts hearts and minds were filled with a cold and numbing fear. What did it mean? What did it say? What was this dread and alien iron moon? And what dark mysteries did it hold?
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this earth. Suddenly, it has become as much a part of the 20th century as the whir of your vacuum cleaner. It is a report from man's farthest frontier, the radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite, as it passed over New York earlier today.
The appearance in the sky of the baby moon has naturally produced an enormous impression throughout the world. Man's most daring dreams are coming true. The launching of the artificial Earth satellite opens up the way to the conquest of interplanetary space.
Welcome to the strange secret world of Soviet space. As you move from the theater, imagine how it must have been on that October day in 1957 when news of Sputnik flashed around the world. There it was, above our heads and homes, racing through the night sky, broadcasting its ominous electronic song. In the Soviet Union, newspaper headlines reported the launch of Sputnik as a glorious victory for Soviet science. Yet, in the streets of America and in the halls of Congress and in the American press, there was suspicion and there was fear. In the 1950s, it was generally known the Russians had the atomic bomb. If they could hurl Sputnik into space, surely all our cities were within range of their missiles. America, which had felt invincible ever since the Revolutionary War, now wondered if the tide of history had turned. In the Russian language, Sputnik means traveling companion. But it was such a small traveler. It contained no weapon, just a simple radio transmitter. It was merely a bit of metal and wire, and it weighed only 184 pounds. President Eisenhower said of the Soviet achievement, "They have put one small ball in the air." Why then was the American scientific community so shocked and amazed when Sputnik was launched? Let's begin our travel through Soviet space. Move on behind the star field and you'll begin to understand why such an innocent-looking metal ball changed the world. In this area, you can see the evolution of Soviet rocketry from the early 1900s until the present. These rockets range from a design by the great Konstantin Tsiolkovsky through the early Soviet Gerd rocket weighing only 65 pounds to the Energia rocket, the world's biggest rocket weighing 5 million pounds. Sputnik was an outstanding scientific achievement, but it was not the development of the satellite that so shocked the American scientific community. It was the enormous power of the Soviet R-7 rocket that launched it into space. For the first time in history, enough power was harnessed to enable a payload to break free of the Earth's gravitational pull. Our scientists calculated a 100,000-pound rocket would be required to launch a payload the size of Sputnik. That would be 4 times more than America's most powerful rocket. The Soviet designers focused on raw power, the Americans on electronic sophistication. The great German rocket designer Hermann Oberth said this:
"The Russian rockets remind me of simple alarm clocks. You can throw them against the wall and they will keep on ticking. American rockets are like expensive ladies' wristwatches that look nice but tend to stop frequently."
In a very real way, this statement represented the difference in philosophy between Soviet and American rocketry. When they came up with a good design, the Soviets stayed with that design over the years. The Vostok rocket, still being used today for some satellite launches, is basically the same that launched Yuri Gagarin into space 30 years ago. None of the rockets you see here were ever considered ends in themselves. They are simply tools, a means of achieving the great dream of all rocket designers, the dream of manned flight beyond the atmosphere of Earth. Move on beyond this section on either side of the barrier to begin early manned exploration of space. Laika, Belka, Strelka, Ugaluk, Veterak. Their names are not as well known as Yuri Gagarin or even the cosmonauts of today, but they are among the animals that paved the way for man's continuing exploration of space. This spacecraft is called Bion. 9 missions were flown using vehicles of this type, each designed to investigate the effect of the space environment on living organisms. Space was an unknown frontier. How would the weightless environment affect a man or woman's health and performance? How would the organs of the body be affected? What about stress, balance, coordination? Would air bubbles form in the bloodstream? What about madness or the possibility of eventual mutations? In search of answers to these questions, animals had been sent into space as early as 1951. Sputnik 2, launched less than a month after the first Sputnik, carried the first living creature into Earth orbit, a dog named Laika. The Bion missions, coming 16 years after Sputnik 2, were more sophisticated and international in nature. Researchers were seeking to understand how the space environment would affect reproduction, the regeneration of tissue, and the function of the immune system. Specimens, such as rats, monkeys, flies, and a wide variety of plant materials, are carried in the Vostok capsule, which is the round segment of the spacecraft. Near Bion, the capsule you can see with its parachute actually returned a cargo of living specimens back to Earth in 1983. Look at the capsule's discoloration caused when it re-entered Earth's atmosphere. This Vostok capsule is the same basic design that returned Yuri Gagarin to Earth 30 years ago. You may want to turn your soundtrack off for a moment and study the illustration of the complete operation of a manned Vostok launch and re-entry cycle. Remember, you can turn your soundtrack off at any time to explore on your own. When you're ready to continue deeper into space, switch your soundtrack on again and join us in our journey to Mars. journey will only take about 20 steps. But if you were to actually travel the more than 40 million miles to Mars, it would take about 6 months. The red planet Mars was named after the ancient Roman god of war. In mythology, this mysterious planet has often been associated with war and violence and dread. Perhaps it's appropriate that in Latin, the names of the two moons of Mars are Phobos and Deimos, or fear and panic. The Soviets have been exploring Mars for over 20 years. This large spacecraft, Phobos 2, was designed to explore Mars and its larger moon, Phobos. Look for the flags of the many nations that contributed their technology to this mission. Phobos 2 was to enter Mars orbit and then rendezvous with and send landers onto the Martian moon, Phobos. But after its journey of over 6 months, just as it was about to accomplish its mission, the spacecraft went out of control and was lost. Is there life on Mars? The Soviets sent 10 missions to Mars, and in a way, these missions were a triumph of science over myth. Even before the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli observed in the late 19th century what came to be called the canals of Mars, people have envisioned the red planet as the home of an old and dying civilization. Early in the space race, both the United States and the Soviet Union set their sights on Mars. In the 1960s, America was the first to fly by Mars with its Mariner spacecraft and send back pictures to achieve a soft landing on the planet. It broadcast data for about 20 seconds before communication was lost, but enough data had been gained from both American and Soviet probes to reveal a hostile and arid world of stone and dust and frozen gases. The findings would forever end the myth of Mars as the home of intelligent beings. Is there life on Mars? Highly unlikely. But to this day, the existence of Martian life in some form or another has not been totally disproved. The loss of Phobos 2 was a bitter disappointment to Soviet scientists.
Некоторые
Phobos 2 was a bitter disappointment to Soviet scientists.
Некоторые называют нашу марсианскую программу.
There are those who call our Mars program a failure. We had such high hopes. I myself see our Mars probes as a triumph of stamina. We kept trying. As long as one perseveres, failure can never characterize the effort. And we'll be there one day, on the red planet Mars. Before long, you'll see.
Switch off your soundtrack if you wish to spend more time here. The detailed drawing at the base of the spacecraft will help you understand more about Phobos 2. Switch your soundtrack on again when you're ready to continue. The next stage of our journey will be a visit to the Granat Astronomical Observatory. You can view it from the ground, or if you wish, you may climb the viewing platform. Mars was an ambitious objective for space explorers. Yet, it was just a small corner of our universe. What about the worlds beyond the world we could see? What worlds waited in the vastness of deep space? Nearly 400 years ago, Galileo studied the heavens through his small and primitive telescope. He discovered the phases of Venus, the rings of Saturn, and the 4 largest moons of Jupiter, with a small tube fitted with a single lens and an eyepiece, an instrument that magnified no more than 30 times. Galileo helped revolutionize mankind's idea of the universe. It became apparent that Earth was not the center of the universe or of our solar system. We were but one of the countless worlds wandering among the stars. Imagine what Galileo would have discovered if he had possessed an observatory like this one, the giant Granat Astronomical Observatory. Launched by the Soviets in 1989, a full year before the United States launched the Hubble telescope. The Granat is opening a new window of discovery to the universe. With its sophisticated gamma and X-ray detectors and its Sigma X-ray telescope, scientists are able to see stars never seen by the human eye. Our vision of the universe is extended to distant galaxies and into mysterious realms we could only have imagined before. Granat's eyes see neutron stars so dense, 1 teaspoon of their matter would weigh more than the entire Earth. Black holes so powerful they swallow stars. White dwarfs with temperatures thousands of times hotter than our own sun. The powerful eyes of Granat are providing answers. Answers which may lead to an understanding of the origin and boundaries and the eventual fate of the universe. Scientists and astronomers from many nations, including Holland, France, Denmark, Bulgaria, and the Soviet Union, are participating in the Granat mission. Several have indicated their view of the universe has changed as a result of their observations.
Традициональные взгляды прошли через века, со времен древних греков.
The ancient Greeks spoke of the music of the spheres, a universe that is majestically serene. But Granat reveals a universe in constant turmoil and change. We see exploding stars, galactic storms, and hot gas giving birth to new storms. It is far from a tranquil universe. We see powerful forces in constant and dynamic motion and change.
Beyond the Granat Observatory is the Oriole Automatic Station. A joint project of French and Soviet scientists, this orbiting instrument package was used to study the mysterious northern lights, or aurora borealis. These great displays of color and light in the northern sky are caused when protons and electrons shot from the sun strike the upper Earth's atmosphere. Now switch off your soundtrack. When you're ready, switch it on again and travel to the next destination in Soviet space, Venus, the planet that is known as both the morning and the evening star. Venus, Earth's nearest neighbor, has been called the Garden Planet. Early in the 19th century, it was described as an oceanic paradise, a beautiful world of rainforests and verdant meadow and towering snow-white cloud. Soviet scientists have been fascinated by Venus since the early days of their space programs. To date, they have successfully landed 10 probes on the planet. In 1970, the Venera 7 was the first spacecraft to successfully land on Venus. Subsequent Venera landers deployed drills and other devices for collecting soil and rock samples. One of the most exciting accomplishments of the Venus probe missions was the interception of Halley's Comet. Scientists knew that in 1985 there would be a rare alignment of Venus and Halley's Comet. To take advantage of this event, a superior version of Venera called Vega, the large spacecraft you see here, was developed. 2 Vega spacecraft were launched within a week of each other in 1985. Their mission was to lower lander modules onto the surface of Venus and to release balloons into the Venusian atmosphere. They then were to continue on to rendezvous with Halley's Comet. Their instrument package included a shoebox-sized dust collector provided by NASA scientists. Both spacecraft were right on target by cosmic standards, the second coming within 5,000 miles of the comet's nucleus. What Venera and Vega missions found was a Venus far different from what legend would have us believe. They found daytime temperatures in excess of 800 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature as hot as the inside of a self-cleaning oven. They found atmospheric pressure more than 100 times that of Earth. The rocks glowed like an electric stove. They found an atmosphere of 97% carbon dioxide with swirling upper clouds with poisonous sulfuric acid. In fact, there had evolved on Venus the worst possible greenhouse effect. Now scientists wonder, is there something we can learn from the greenhouse effect on Venus that will help prevent its occurrence on Earth? You can see near the Vega spacecraft both the cutaway lander module and the atmospheric balloon. Switch off your soundtrack while you examine them. Turn it on again when you're ready to explore the moon.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
There is something about the moon that draws our curiosity like a moth to flame. Stories about traveling to the moon have been told and written since the very early chapters of human history. Then, in our own time, what had always been fantasy became actual detailed plans for a manned mission to the moon. Theoretically, it was possible, and both Russia and America vowed to be the first to walk on the moon's surface. At first, it seemed the Soviets would win the race. They were the first to conduct a lunar flyby, the first to make a soft landing on the moon, and the first to photograph the far side of the moon's surface. Then, on July 20th, 1969, American astronaut Neil Armstrong spoke these words.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The United States had landed the first man on the moon. By the end of 1972, 27 American Apollo astronauts had traveled to the moon, and 12 had landed and walked on the lunar surface. During this time, the Soviet Union had accomplished over 20 unmanned missions to the moon. The year before the last Apollo moon flight, the Soviet Union launched what is surely the strangest off-road vehicle ever designed. It was called the Lunokhod 1, or Lunar Rover. Walter Cronkite described the Lunokhod as a bathtub upside down on wheels. In 1973, Lunokhod 2, after an 8-day flight to the moon, landed and was deployed. It wandered for 23 miles over the lunar surface, from the Sea of Serenity to the Taurus Mountains. During its explorations, it returned some 80,000 television pictures to Earth. The lunar rover also made a detailed analysis of radioactivity and ultraviolet light levels and measured the moon's magnetic field. Why did the Soviets not send a man to the moon? There were a number of interlocking reasons. Yuri Gagarin, the heart of their program, had been killed in a plane crash, and the chief designer, Sergei Korolev, its soul, had died. There had been a reorganization of the entire Soviet space program. But the major reason, only recently revealed, was the continued failure of their giant N-1 lunar launch vehicle. 4 times they tried to launch this enormous rocket. 4 times the rocket failed. The manned lunar program, disheartened and in disarray, was canceled. Since 1972, no lunar landing missions have been undertaken by any country. Across from the lunar rover, you will find the return capsule from the most recent mission to the moon. Soviet scientists used the Lunar 24 capsule and devices to collect and return to Earth samples of the moon's surface. Samples from moon missions helped scientists develop new theories about the origin of the moon. Because moon rocks and soil contain material common on Earth and also materials alien to Earth, the evidence suggests there was a time, about 4.5 billion years ago, when our planet and another collided. Over millions of years, the moon was formed from the debris of that collision. You may wish to turn off your soundtrack now and explore on your own. When you're ready to leave, switch it on again as you move to the Baikonur Cosmodrome and experience the most historic moment in space exploration.
look, Brian, whose was it? Brantley's is bigger than that. Oh, it's right there in front. It's those two. See, that's how I got myself up there. Daddy.
he was here, and he went to all the schools before the opening. He went. And talk. I think you can see. Now you see.
Until recently, few people outside the Soviet Union had ever heard the name Baikonur. It was a place in central Russia, almost as unfamiliar as the surface of the moon. On the broad, windswept plains of Kazakhstan, Baikonur is a place of sad ballads and magnificent dreams. For here, every cosmonaut since Yuri Gagarin had begun his or her journey into space.
This is a working model of the launch pad at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Soviet Central Russia, 2,000 kilometers from Moscow, where over 50 launches are carried out each year. From this launch pad, Yuri Gagarin, the world's first space traveler, was launched into Earth orbit on April 12, 1961. The era of human exploration of space had begun. Other manned spacecraft soon followed. The road to the stars begins here on Earth, amid the intricate launch pad structures and thunderous roar of flames. But a launch is preceded by a whole sequence of intricate pre-launch operations. This working model will show you how the complex operates as it prepares and carries out a Vostok rocket launch. Trusses that will service the rocket and the spacecraft once it is on the launch pad are lowered. They are positioned so as not to interfere with the placement of the rocket on the launch pad supports. The 4 launch pad supports have been moved apart and are ready to receive the rocket. During pre-launch operations, the supports are slowly lowered, and at the moment of liftoff, they'll quickly swing aside. The unit for servicing the lower part of the rocket moves into position in the launch pad well. In the assembly and test building, the 3-stage Vostok rocket has been assembled from the individual components and thoroughly tested. The rocket has already been mated with the spacecraft. A railroad car equipped with a special erector delivers the rocket to the Cosmodrome. It moves slowly along the steel track. Even now, it's easy to see how, once erect, the rocket will tower many meters high. The locomotive moves away and the erector is connected to the power, communication, and control feeds. The erector moves the rocket the last few meters into its required position. Before the rocket is hoisted, the erector is suspended by rigid supports. Its hydraulic system then hoists the rocket into a vertical position. The launch system supports now close around the rocket. The erector's beam descends to an intermediate position. The rocket's weight has now been shifted to the launch system supports. The launch system is designed to balance loads of many tons with great precision. The erector moves away from the launch pad. The tail end of the erector beam bends and is relocked. The erector beam returns to its original position. The diesel locomotive goes into action. It moves the erector away from the launch pad. The rocket, supported by its midsection, is suspended over the concrete well of the launch pad. Hydraulic support jacks are lowered. The service platforms are raised into position. They circle the rocket, providing access for maintenance. The elevators carry personnel to the service platforms. They're also used to deliver the cosmonauts to their spacecraft. The cable masts, designed for connecting the rocket's onboard equipment to the ground power mains, are raised one after another. The fueling of the rocket's main stage is conducted by way of the big mast. A train carrying propellant approaches the umbilical masts. It's followed by a train with the second fuel components necessary for the rocket's flight, the oxidizer. Much more oxidizer than propellant is required. The cable masts, the platforms, the support, and other equipment are all mounted on a massive turntable.
model.
The personnel now leave the service platforms. The vital stage of fueling the rocket begins. The umbilical masts are now operating. The fueling is over. The service personnel are evacuated. Intensive work is underway in the command post. Signals that all systems are go are flashed to the control panels. The cabin servicing the lower part of the rocket is moved away. The service platforms are moved away to protect them from the hot gases spewing from the rocket at liftoff. The hydraulic jacks are lowered. The cable masts swing away. All the pre-launch operations are now over. The launch complex and the rocket are ready for liftoff. You will now hear a documentary recording of the world's first launch of the human being. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin.
Not hot, it was cool. So you sit back so when it wakes up, this won't come out.
The great rocket designer Sergei Pavlovich Korolev created the rockets and spacecraft that helped the Soviets achieve so many firsts in space. He was a genius, a mysterious, shadowy figure. He was unknown even in his own country, and officially, he didn't even exist. Yet, he was a father figure to the Soviet cosmonauts. He looked after all of them. He called them my little eagles. It was here at Baikonur Cosmodrome on April 12, 1961, that the most famous of these little eagles, Yuri Gagarin, became the first man in space. Imagine what it must have been like back then as Korolev and Gagarin prepared for one of the most significant events in human history. The Soviets conduct their pre-launch checkout in a building some miles from the launch pad. After checkout and capsule fueling, the spacecraft and rocket are mated horizontally, and the long white and silver spacecraft is positioned on the rail car that will take it to the launch pad.
April 11th, 1961. Launch day, -1. At 5 a.m., the 60-foot hangar doors open, and the rail car begins its hour-long journey to the launch pad. The locomotive moves away. The rocket is hoisted into a vertical position. Support arms and service masts are raised to support the rocket until the moment of liftoff. Yuri Gagarin is driven to the launch pad. Korolev and Gagarin ascend the elevator and spend the next hour together going through final checks. Gagarin returns to his quarters to rest and to think about tomorrow. April 12th, 5:30 a.m. Korolev has had no sleep. Gagarin is awakened. He dresses in layers of woolen underwear and puts on his bright orange spacesuit. 7 a.m. At the launch pad, the final checks are underway. The rocket is fueled. 7:30 a.m. Yuri Gagarin arrives. He walks across the apron to the elevator and turns to address the workers.
Дорогие друзья, люди всех стран и континентов.
Dear friends, people of all countries and continents, my life until now seems like one glorious moment. Everything I have accomplished and experienced in the past was for the sake of these moments. I say to you, dear friends, goodbye, as people always say to each other when setting out on a distant journey. I would like to embrace you all. Farewell.
Yuri Gagarin turns and disappears into the elevator. He rises to the top of the rocket and climbs into the Vostok space capsule. The hatch is closed. He is alone. 1 hour till launch. From his underground concrete bunker, 100 yards from the launch pad, Korolev takes direct control. Korolev calls to Gagarin.
Kiedra, this is Zarya 1. How do you read? Kiedra is Gagarin's call sign. It means cedar. Zarya, the Russian word for dawn, was the code name for Earth control.
Now listen to an actual tape of exchanges between Korolev and Gagarin on that historic morning. In just seconds, these two men would change the world forever.
Федор, я зарядил. Внимание, минутная готовность. Минутная готовность. Отец, я Кедр. Вас понял, минутная готовность. Занимал исходное положение, занял. Ключ на старт. Ключ на старт. Есть старт. Протяжка 1. Здесь протяжка. Продувка. 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 Есть продувка. Ключ за дренаж. Ключ за дренаж. Есть дренаж. Зажигание. Федор, я зарядил. Зажигание. Понял, дается зажигание. Здесь так. Понял. Поехали.
Hayechali, I'm gone. Gagarin's farewell. Hayechali, man's first farewell to Earth.
Now we are rising above the Earth. Travel now into the space tunnel and see how it feels to journey into space. Listen to the thoughts of other travelers in space as they watch the Earth grow smaller beneath their ships.
Мы чувствуем, что мы стоим на мостике большого
We get the feeling that we're standing on the bridge of a ship at sea. We even get the feeling that the bow of the ship has risen on a wave and the horizon is going down.
You can't see any people. You can't hear any noise. It just seems like a very small, fragile, serene little sphere. It makes you wish it were really as serene as it appears.
Seulement un enfant.
Only a child in its innocence could appreciate the purity and splendor of this vision.
Я потратила много времени.
I spent a lot of time observing the Earth and taking pictures. I have this image now of the Earth. I'll dream about it for a long time. It's not only in my mind, but in my heart as well.
Before I flew,
I was already aware of how small and vulnerable our planet was. But only when I saw it from space did I realize that mankind's most urgent task is to cherish and preserve it for future generations.
By now, cosmonauts have logged more than 20 years of experience living in space. A record number of 6 cosmonauts have been on board the Mir space station at one time. Some cosmonauts have remained in space for over a year. Their experience is paving the way for a time when extended voyages will be made to distant planets. Ahead is a model of the Mir space station, where cosmonauts have lived and worked more than 200 miles above the Earth. Imagine how it must feel to be caged inside a cylinder so small, floating in space in a world often turned upside down. Here, the most simple daily task seems strange and terribly difficult.
Today was our bath day. It took more than 6 hours. Because of weightlessness, water does not pour downward as it does on Earth. It remains suspended in globs in the air. On Earth, it is impossible to drown in the shower, but here it is very easy. So we must wear snorkels and clips on our noses and goggles like scuba divers. When I was showering, I thought I might choke here with water. How funny it would be. He drowned in space.
Living in space is also a constant encounter with the unknown. You are protected from death by a thin veneer of technology and by your wits and your nerve.
There are times when we are very frightened. We are sweating and our heart is pounding, and this fear paralyzes our movements. We just want to close our eyes and do nothing. But we manage to overcome our feelings, which is a hard thing to do. Feelings are more difficult to control than fire or water. A lot of people can become cosmonauts, but not everyone.
In this area, notice the specialized equipment and gear used by the cosmonauts in their long voyages through space. Do you see what Soviets call the Icarus space motorcycle? It was designed for the most dangerous and fascinating of all space activities, the spacewalk.
When the hatch opened, I looked straight down 200 miles. I knew I was safe, but it still bothered me. To be honest, I didn't care for it. I was scared. To get out of the hatch, I had to face outward into the void. I saw stars so close, it looked like I could reach out and touch them.
You can visit the crew quarters of the Mir space station. Switch off your soundtrack as you enter. You can switch it on again when you're ready to proceed to the Soyuz return capsule.
Workstation under their exercise. You can see their treadmill over there that's in the hallway over there. How'd you like for them to ride a bicycle upside down?
Very upside down.
What's wrong? Why are you wandering all over the place?
It's like sideways.
Just don't look up. You look up, you'll fall backwards.
That's true. It's weird. It's up and
You surprised that a Tulip like there a while ago, speaking in his language. Give me a fan.
I know, my balance. I might have to do that.
You said what, Joe? That's their shower.
Just keep playing. It's between rooms. Just keep playing.
They let that down and take a shower.
6 hours later.
What is that?
Yeah. I think he's surprised in his Tulip like there speaking.
Where can we go here?
No, you can't go in the dishwasher. Again. What do you think that might be? You're right. What do you think this might be right here? It might be a shower?
No, your shower's above your head up here.
Over here?
Right there. That white deal above your head.
Right here.
That lets down.
That lets down for the shower.
Николай, я жду тебя у выхода. Поехали.
Now it's time to end our journey through space. It's time to go home. The Soyuz spacecraft, the vehicle that ferries cosmonauts back and forth to the Mir space station, has been in use for more than 20 years. For the Russian explorers of space, this capsule is the only way home.
Кто знает почему?
We are anxious.
Кто знает?
Who knows why? What's it like down there?
Мы больше не живем на Земле.
We are no longer accustomed to life on the ground. Our lives are attuned to this small island in space. And suddenly, here we come, back to the big world. We don't feel comfortable with the idea.
Капсула.
The capsule that returned Gagarin to Earth was round. With Gagarin's capsule, there was no way to control the descent. More recent capsules are bell-shaped. Now cosmonauts can control the attitude of the capsule with small jets of gas as they enter the Earth's atmosphere.
The first rogue parachute opens and the cosmonauts are briefly hammered with 12 to 14 Gs. Unlike American astronauts who land in the sea, cosmonauts must prepare for the shock of landing on the ground.
We hit the ground suddenly and hard, so hard that we almost felt our internal organs shift inside us. I was hanging suspended by the safety harness above Tolya, and I asked him, "Are you alive?" "Yeah," he smiles. "Alive."
250 men and women from nearly 24 nations have made the journey to space and back. In 1975, Apollo 18, an American spaceship, and Soyuz 19 of the Soviet Union rendezvoused and docked in space. The adventure in space began to bring the two old adversaries together. Now, as trust and respect grows between the two nations, the competition of the past is turning into the cooperation of the future. When you're ready, it's time for our journey to end. But as you leave and enter the world of Earth, consider for a moment what our journey has meant.
Cosmonaut Valentin Lebedev said it best. We are launched into space, citizens of our own nations. We return as patriots of planet Earth. We are at the threshold of a new age in space. Soon, we will discover new worlds beyond imagining. But isn't it just possible, the more we discover about new worlds, the more we will learn about living together in the old one? We just might rediscover the marvelous promise of this one small, vulnerable, beautiful blue planet called Earth.
This concludes our journey through Soviet space.